The black SUV swerved toward me, tires screeching. I swung my laptop bag like a weapon. Metal crunched against metal. Now I'm running through subway tunnels, my lungs burning, because the woman I came to marry doesn't exist. The only trace of her leads to my best friend's apartment. And he's not answering his phone. 3 years of love, 1 engagement ring, and a digital ghost. The GPS signal blinks from Seattle, but the man who knows why is silent. I have 24 hours before they find me again. The lobby of the St. Regis smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. Marcus Reed gripped his leather briefcase, the handle slick against his palm. Behind the marble counter, the receptionist tapped a rhythm on her keyboard, her expression shifting from professional warmth to a practiced, apologetic mask. "No one by the name of Maya Thorne holds a reservation here, sir." She smoothed her silk scarf. "Are you certain of the date?" Marcus stepped toward the street, the cool San Francisco fog clinging to his wool coat. He navigated the grid toward the Mission District, chasing the address on Maya's embossed business card. Instead of the promised Thorne Gallery, a chain-link fence groaned in the wind. Piles of rusted rebar and jagged concrete slabs occupied the lot. Dust swirled around a faded permit taped to a plywood board. No glass facade, no curated oil paintings, only the skeletal remains of a demolished tenement. The air tasted of grit and damp salt. Marcus felt a cold hollow open in his chest, a vacuum where 3 years of digital intimacy had lived. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over her contact photo. A soft focus shot of a woman with auburn hair, tilting her head 15 degrees to the left. The pixels seemed to mock him. Every credential she offered, the prestigious residency, the hotel suite, the brick-and-mortar legacy, dissolved into the gray afternoon. A heavy SUV turned the corner, its engine a low, predatory thrum against the asphalt. Marcus shifted his weight, his pulse drumming against his collar. The realization settled in his gut like lead. He hadn't been invited to a partnership, but lured into a void. He tightened his grip on the briefcase, the metal buckles cold, as the black vehicle slowed to a crawl beside him. The SUV didn't just pass. It lurched, tires screeching as it jumped the curb. The sound of rubber tearing against concrete was like a gunshot. Marcus scrambled backward, his heels catching on the uneven sidewalk. 2 men, their faces obscured by dark fabric, vaulted from the rear doors before the vehicle had even fully stopped. They didn't shout commands. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. One lunged for Marcus's shoulder, fingers like iron hooks. 1, 2, 3. Marcus hissed under his breath, his childhood ritual of counting kicking in as the world tilted. He didn't have a weapon, but he had his laptop bag, a heavy leather satchel packed with a reinforced chassis and a spare battery brick. As the first man reached for him, Marcus swung the bag in a wide, desperate arc. The corner of the case caught the attacker squarely in the throat with a sickening thud. The man collapsed, clutching his neck, a wet, gasping sound escaping his lips. Marcus didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. He turned and sprinted toward the glowing neon mouth of the nearby subway station, his lungs burning with the sharp, metallic tang of the city air. The station was a subterranean hive, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled breath. Marcus dove through the turnstiles, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't look back until he was deep in the bowels of the station, hidden behind a concrete pillar. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses. He needed a plan. He couldn't go back to his hotel, and he couldn't stay in the open. He remembered a small, windowless office he kept under a shell company name, a digital fortress in a physical basement. He navigated the tunnels, switching trains 3 times, watching the reflections in the dark glass for any sign of a suit or a mask. Inside the safe house, the air was stagnant, smelling of scorched dust and old electronics. Marcus sat at a metal desk, the cold surface biting into his forearms. He began to work. He didn't use a mouse. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clack, 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 the only sound in the room. He was a surgeon now, cutting through layers of digital deception. He went to the source, the niche music forum where he and Maya had first traded messages about obscure 90s shoegaze bands. Subverted. Marcus decided to run a deep trace on the forum's private messaging logs. It was a logical, smart move. He'd spent years building his own security tools for exactly this purpose. If Maya had sent him a single image, a single link, there would be a digital footprint. He found the packet, a photo of a sunset she'd sent 3 months ago. He began to peel back the layers of the file, looking for the physical location of the device that had uploaded it. His reasoning was sound. Even the best proxies often leave a microscopic trail in the file's header. He felt a surge of confidence. He was the master of this realm. No one could hide from him here. The trace began to resolve. A progress bar crawled across his screen, glowing a soft, hopeful green. Success. A map blossomed on his monitor, a red dot pulsing over a residential grid. Marcus let out a long, shaky breath, his shoulders finally dropping from his ears. He'd done it. He'd found the physical truth behind the ghost. He reached for a bottle of water, the plastic crinkling in the silence. The crisis was under his control. He just needed to call David, his best friend in Seattle, to tell him he was safe and that he had a lead. He felt a wave of relief wash through him. He wasn't crazy. He was just being hunted, and now he had the upper hand. He leaned closer to the screen to copy the coordinates. That's when he saw it. The red dot wasn't just in Seattle. It was centered exactly on a high-rise luxury complex on 5th Avenue. Marcus frowned. He knew that building. He'd helped David move into the penthouse there 6 months ago. A cold prickle danced across his skin, across his... He refreshed the trace, thinking it was a glitch, a ghost in the routing. But the data remained stubbornly consistent. The signal wasn't coming from a gallery or a hotel. It was coming from David's living room. The truth hit him like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air in the dim light of the basement. The world didn't just tilt. It inverted. David Miller, the man who had been his rock for a decade, the man who had listened to Marcus cry over Maya's illnesses and travels, was the one sending the messages. Every "I love you" from Maya had been typed by the hand that had clinked beer bottles with Marcus just last week. He wasn't in a partnership. He was in a cage. He had been lured to San Francisco not to meet a woman, but to be disposed of. His best friend hadn't just betrayed him. He had authored his soul's destruction. Marcus's knees gave way, and he slumped into the chair, the rhythmic counting in his head falling silent for the first time in years. The realization that his entire life was a scripted simulation sent Marcus into a cold, focused rage. He didn't pack. He simply grabbed his encrypted drive and headed for the airport. He booked a red-eye to Seattle under a fake name, his mind a whirlwind of if-then statements. If David was Maya, then why the SUV? Why the attack? He needed to see David's face. He needed to find the point where the code had turned malicious. As the plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from David. "Marcus, where are you? Someone broke into my place. Everything's gone. I'm scared, man. Please call me." Marcus stared at the screen. The wording was classic David. vulnerable, seeking connection, using the word scared to trigger Marcus's protective instincts. He didn't reply. He watched the clouds beneath the wing, illuminated by a pale moon, and felt like he was looking at the surface of an alien planet. When he landed in Seattle, the city was draped in its characteristic heavy gray lid. The air was a damp 48 degrees, a chill that seeped through his coat and settled into his joints. He took a cab to the luxury complex, but as he approached the glass and steel tower, the familiar sense of home was replaced by a sharp, jagged unease. The lobby, usually bustling with concierges and residents, was eerily still. The smell of expensive lilies was gone, replaced by the sharp, stinging scent of industrial bleach. He pushed through the heavy glass doors. The white marble floors were polished to a mirror's shine, but the desk was empty. No Kevin, the lanky security guard who usually sat there picking at his cuticles. Marcus walked toward the desk, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the sterile silence. On the floor behind the counter, a black radio lay buzzing, a static-filled hiss that sounded like a dying breath. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just the absence of life where it should have been. The building's security hadn't just failed. It had been surgically removed. He didn't take the elevator. He knew how easy it was to trap someone in a steel box. He headed for the emergency stairwell, his hand hovering over the tactical pen in his pocket. 1, 2, 3, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He reached the landing for the 4th floor when he heard it, a heavy, metallic thud from above. He looked up through the gap in the stairs just in time to see a red fire extinguisher plummeting toward him. He threw himself against the concrete wall, the heavy cylinder whistling past his ear and smashing into the stairs below with a deafening clang. The vibration shivered through the soles of his shoes. A man stepped onto the landing above him. He was built like a fire hydrant, his neck wider than his head. Thomas Garcia. Marcus recognized the rhythm before the man even moved, the rhythmic tap, 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 tap of his fingers against the railing. 4 taps, the signature of a man who didn't negotiate. Thomas didn't speak. He lunged down the stairs, his weight making the concrete groan. Marcus didn't have the strength to fight a man that size, but he had the geometry. As Thomas swung a massive fist, Marcus stepped inside the arc, driving the hardened tip of his tactical pen into the nerve cluster in the man's thigh. Thomas let out a grunt of pain, his leg buckling. Marcus didn't stop. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, using the momentum of the descent against him, and shoved him toward the small storage closet on the landing. He slammed the door and jammed the handle with the tactical pen, leaving the man cursing and thumping against the steel. Marcus kept climbing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. By the time he reached the penthouse floor, his lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. He stepped into the hallway, expecting David. But instead, he found Sarah Johnson. She was standing outside David's door, her hand trembling as she fumbled with a master key. Sarah, the woman from the office who always smoothed her hair behind her ears and asked, "You know?" after every sentence. She looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that looked genuine. "Marcus? Oh God, you weren't supposed to be here yet," she whispered, her voice fluttering. "What are you doing with that key, Sarah?" Marcus asked, his voice cold. He stepped closer, noting how she mirrored his posture, leaning back as he leaned forward. "David, he said you were in trouble. He said you needed help," she stammered. "But then he told me to install the software on your laptop. Months ago, Marcus. I didn't want to. But he had those photos of my brother, you know? He said it was just for your protection." The betrayal had layers, like an onion of rotting data. Sarah hadn't just been a co-worker. She'd been a bridge. David had used her to bypass Marcus's physical firewalls while he bypassed his emotional ones. Marcus felt a wave of nausea. He looked at the penthouse door. The biometric panel was glowing a soft blue, waiting for a fingerprint or a retinal scan that would never come from him. "Give me the key, Sarah," Marcus said. She handed it over without a word, her eyes darting to the floor. Marcus ignored her, turning his attention to the lock. He didn't use the key. He pulled a small, humming device from his pocket, a localized jammer he'd built to confuse electronic sensors. He pressed it against the panel. The blue light flickered, turned red, then groaned as the internal magnets retracted. The doors swung open into a dark, silent tomb. The apartment smelled of ozone and a dying fern. In the center of the room, a high-end server rack hummed, its cooling fans shrieking like a jet engine. On the main monitor, lines of code were scrolling upward at a blurring speed. A data wipe. David was burning the evidence. Marcus lunged for the keyboard, his fingers moving with a desperate, instinctive speed. He didn't try to stop the whole wipe. He looked for the directory he knew would be the core. Project Muse. He slammed a manual override command into the kernel, his heart racing as the progress bar stalled at 98%. He'd frozen it. He'd saved a sliver of the truth. "You always were too fast for your own good, Marcus." The voice came from the shadows by the floor-to-ceiling windows. David Miller stepped into the light of the server LEDs. He wasn't smiling his wide, fake smile now. His face was a mask of cold, clinical indifference. He held a high-voltage taser in his right hand, the prongs glinting in the dark. Before Marcus could even draw a breath to speak, David lunged. The taser struck Marcus in the side, and the world exploded into a white-hot scream of electricity. His muscles seized, his vision fractured, and he felt himself hitting the floor, the cold hardwood biting into his cheek. He couldn't move. His body was a useless weight, a system that had been forcibly shut down. David dragged him across the floor, the sound of Marcus's heels dragging against the wood, a dull, rhythmic thud. He hoisted Marcus into a chair and used zip ties to bind his wrists to the arms. Marcus's head lolled, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. "Why?" Marcus managed to choke out. David walked to the wall-mounted monitor and tapped a sequence. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, night vision feed. It was a hallway Marcus recognized. The floral wallpaper, the grandfather clock, his parents' house in Ohio. A man in a jumpsuit, carrying a toolkit, was standing in the kitchen, talking to Marcus's mother. "My mother died because of a mistake, Marcus," David said, his voice melodic and terrifying. "I learned then that people are just variables. If you control the input, you control the outcome. You were my greatest project. I made you a goddess, and you gave me everything. Your passwords, your secrets, your soul." David leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and stale coffee. "But now you're a bug in the system, and bugs have to be patched." He pointed to the screen. "That man is a specialist. He's currently fixing the gas line in your parents' basement. One signal from me, and that house becomes a fireball. Your shoebox-keeping mother, your shirt-obsessed father, gone. Unless you finish what I started. Delete the Muse directory. Erase yourself, Marcus. Walk away, and they live." Marcus looked at the screen, at his mother's unsuspecting smile as she offered the technician a glass of water. The cruelty of it was so precise, so perfectly calibrated to Marcus's specific fears, that it almost felt beautiful in its horror. David wasn't done. He pulled up an audio file. Remember this? 3 in the morning, 2 years ago. Maya's voice filled the room. Soft, echoing, perfect. I'm so afraid of being alone, Marcus. I feel like you're the only person who truly sees me. Then David played Marcus's response. I see you, Maya. I'd do anything to keep you safe. You're the only thing that's real. David laughed, a dry, rattling sound. I wrote that line for her, you know. I knew exactly how you'd respond. I've been reading your diary for 3 years, Marcus. I know you better than you know yourself. Marcus sat in the chair, the zip ties cutting into his skin. He looked at the server, then at the man who had been his brother. He wasn't counting anymore. He was calculating. Subverted. Marcus looked at David, his expression one of broken, total defeat. Okay, he whispered. You win. I'll do it. Just let me do it from the console. I have the master key in my phone's local cache. It's the only way to purge the backups. David's posture relaxed. His shoulders dropped, and he gave a small, triumphant nod. I knew you'd see reason, Marcus. You're a man of logic, after all. He stepped back, allowing Marcus to lean forward toward the keyboard, his bound hands hovering over the keys. David even smiled, that warm, fatherly smile that had fooled Marcus for a decade. Go on, make it right. Then we can talk about your new life. I have a place for you in Montana. It's quiet. No screens. Just peace. Marcus's fingers danced across the screen. He wasn't deleting. He was navigating the apartment's smart home hub, a system David had bragged about for months. He found the HVAC and the fire suppression overrides. With a single sharp keystroke, he triggered the emergency protocol. The room erupted. High decibel alarms shrieked, a sound so loud it felt like a physical blow to the skull. From the ceiling, a thick, blinding mist of fire suppression foam began to spray, filling the air with a white, chemical fog. What are you doing? David screamed, lunging through the mist. Marcus didn't answer. He used the distraction to roll the chair toward the desk, snagging his phone with his teeth. He had pre-programmed a panic command for his parents' home security system, one that didn't just call the police, but triggered a hard lock on all exterior doors and shut off the main gas valve at the street. He hit the button with his nose just as David's hand slammed into his chest. The victory was supposed to be his. He'd neutralized the threat. He'd saved his parents. He'd outsmarted the architect. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a moment of pure, crystalline triumph as he heard the technician on the monitor shouting in confusion as the heavy security shutters slammed down, trapping him in the mudroom. But as the foam cleared slightly, Marcus saw David's face. He wasn't angry. He was laughing. You think I'm that sloppy, Marcus? David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small secondary remote. The gas technician was the distraction. I knew you'd try to save them. That was phase 1. David pointed to the server. A new window had opened, one Marcus hadn't seen. It was a transfer log. While Marcus had been busy triggering the fire alarms and locking his parents' doors, the Project Muse directory hadn't been frozen. It had been a decoy. The real data? Marcus's entire professional portfolio, his bank accounts, his identity, had been streaming to an offshore server in the Caymans the entire time. I didn't need you to delete it, David said, his voice barely audible over the sirens. I just needed you to stay at the keyboard long enough for the upload to finish. You just gave me the master key I needed to finalize the transfer when you unlocked the cache. Marcus watched the screen. Transfer complete. Identity deleted. His bank account balance hit 0. His social security number flagged as deceased. His professional credentials vanished from every registry. In the eyes of the world, Marcus Reed had ceased to exist. David hadn't just taken his money, he had erased his life. The police would arrive to find a ghost attacking a prominent tech CEO. The sirens of the police cruisers began to wail in the street below, mixing with the shriek of the apartment's alarm. David straightened his tie, looking perfectly calm, perfectly innocent. "Take him," David said to the empty room as the front door was kicked open by a SWAT team. "He's been stalking me for months. I think he's lost his mind over some woman who doesn't exist." The aftermath was a blur of fluorescent lights and cold steel. David Miller was never charged. The evidence Marcus had saved was found to be fabricated, a manifesto written by a delusional man. Maya Thorne was officially declared a figment of Marcus's imagination, a psychological projection of a lonely coder. Marcus didn't fight. He didn't explain. He knew the code was too clean, the lie too perfect. He spent 6 months in a facility, then another 6 in a halfway house, before he finally managed to disappear. He moved to a small town in Vermont, a place where the snow stayed on the ground for 6 months of the year, and the only network was the local diner's corkboard. He lived in a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and damp cedar. He had no phone. He had no computer. He spent his days chopping wood until his hands were a mass of calluses and his mind was a blank slate. One evening, he sat in a booth at the back of a roadside diner. The air smelled of burnt coffee and maple syrup. A woman at the counter, a traveler with auburn hair and a tired smile, turned to look at him. She tilted her head 15 degrees to the left. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, her voice soft and familiar. Marcus didn't look up. He didn't smile. He didn't count the seconds. He looked at her reflection in the dark, rain-streaked window. He looked for the shadow, for the glitch in the rendering, for the hand of the architect behind the eyes. He saw nothing but a woman. But in a world made of ghosts, that was the most terrifying thing of all. He picked up his coffee, the steam rising into the cold air, and realized he would be looking for the code in the heartbeat of every person he ever met for the rest of his life. He was free, but the cage had moved inside him. He stood up, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out into the biting Vermont night, his footsteps silent in the fresh, white snow. He didn't look back. He just kept walking until the lights of the diner were nothing but a faint, flickering signal in the dark.